Good morning. Well, this is Jim Whiting, and this program is An Ordinary Man. And we're going to talk today about the abnormal things that are going on in today's world. The things that we would have thought could never even be discussed. You know, today we have protests going on, and we have issues before the Supreme Court, and we have some actions and reactions that I don't know about you, but I am just amazed at how abnormal they are. The Supreme Court the other day, I guess it was yesterday or so, was spending a significant amount of time trying to determine what a man and what a woman is. And I just bet if you ask a fifth grader, what is a man and what is a woman? I bet that fifth grader could answer that question. But the Supreme Court was having a hard time with it. And I find that really odd. I have, as you can see, unbelievable amounts of notes here this week because I've never seen so many crazy things, abnormal things going on. Not to mention, of course, the Supreme Court. That kind of is the icing on the cake. But there's some other things that have occurred. I think it is amazing for a kid that like me in the '60s who grew up in an era of violence. This was a period of time for civil disorder. There were riots pretty frequently. There were protests. There was military actions. I can remember when Governor Faubus in Arkansas and Governor Wallace of Alabama were forced by the Attorney General and by armed soldiers to admit black children in white schools. These were real issues. These were real concerns. They weren't dealing with the simplicity of what's a man and what's a woman. They were dealing with discrimination and against people that deserve to be treated equally. And it was a real issue in that time in the '60s. And then, and then we have today, when you think about the protesters that were in Alabama and other places, even up in Wichita, Kansas, where I grew up, the protesters today, I can't figure out what they're protesting for. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's so abnormal. Um, I saw the other day on TV, thanks to Newsmax, which is probably one of the last bastions of showing both sides, although I would say Newsmax is probably very conservative. But I saw people throwing themselves under emergency vehicles to block the ICE agents, the government agents, from being able to arrest murderers, rapists, human traffickers, disgusting people on the face of the earth, and trying to clean up this type of criminality. And they were throwing themselves in front of these emergency vehicles to stop them from doing their job. Is that abnormal? I don't know about you, but I see that as very abnormal. Um, you know, when I think about how we use money to solve problems, and then I see this issue in Minnesota where daycare centers, the real core of helping middle class and people have the opportunity to work, be gainfully employed, and yet have their children in a safe environment in a daycare. And then we find out there are all of these daycares in Minneapolis and other cities that literally have no children and are taking in millions, if not billions, of taxpayer dollars, which could be used to help these other families who really need daycare help. I mean, it's just absurd when you think about that. And I wish I could say that the news media discovered it, but it doesn't look like they did. It looks like another example of YouTube stepping in with an amateur or a less than TV star uh, newsman anchor person stepping in, filming with his camera unbelievable criminality. Is that just unbelievable? You know, I think about these things and then I see where we have decided that we have to protect the world again. It's coming back again. The United States has to protect the world. Unfortunately, for my generation, we suffered from that concept in Vietnam when many of my friends died in that war. And I'm not certain that war ever accomplished one single thing. But now, all of a sudden, we are off to Venezuela. And I'm not doubting that illegal president needed to be taken out of power, but all of a sudden we decide to go in there, kidnapping, bring him back to the United States and try him. In other words, we circumvented any of the normal processes that a country would go through to get rid of a bad leader. Maybe they couldn't have. I don't know. But it seems like, and it concerns me, that that's another example of possibly us becoming again the world monitor. And it has cost so much of lives of when we did that in Vietnam. I know it must have been the same scenario in Korea. And of course, look how we were involved in World War One and World War Two. It just goes on. Fortunately, we have not been involved in Ukraine directly, but I'm really concerned when I see these abnormal. That's just not normal. The job of the United States of presidency, I believe, is to take care of his people and not necessarily others, to help them out, to support them maybe, but to actually take over how they administer their country. I don't know. I don't like that feeling no more than I like that feeling of my friends going to Vietnam and dying for a war that had no purpose in my mind, no purpose. But um, there's so many issues that have come up today, and it's just I have to go through this one issue before I summarize what real issues are to protest. And it's the scenario with this recent event, sad event, where a young lady was killed. And there's nothing more tragic than the loss of life. You know, and I'll just summarize it as I was watching the video. And I know many of you also enjoyed the video from many different perspectives. But I pretty much came up with one conclusion. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time doing the wrong stuff. The victim had parked her car to block ICE enforcement of laws. She was in a an area that was being monitored, controlled, and worked with by law enforcement. She was impeding law enforcement. And let us not forget who we're talking about. We're talking about law enforcement that's going after people who are murderers, rapists. They're here illegally because they can't stay in their own country. They're murderers, rapists, they're human traffickers, they're everything bad that you can think of. And they're also drug dealers on top of all of that. And she's impeding the ICE agent's ability to put those people either in jail or out of the country. Is that abnormal? I don't know. To me, it's just bizarre. She blocks it. And then when 3 or 4 ICE agents approach the vehicle, after I understand, and I saw some other pictures where she had been doing this pretty regularly along the road, blocking ICE enforcement of law, then when he just as he grabs the door to open it up, I'm certain, and arrest her, she guns the car forward. Her wheels slightly slide because of the ice. She bumps an ICE agent back who turns out to be an agent who's already been injured by a vehicle used as a weapon. And that's really what she was doing because she was avoiding law enforcement, and she was also avoiding her own arrest. Knocks him, bumps him back, and enough that he's still able with his gun, which he's already drawn because she's already violated the law. She's already done threatening acts with her vehicle, and he shoots at her in the front window when she races at him. And the bullet goes through the front window and kills her. I can't think of a more sad ending from a whole collection of bad choices. And when I see political leaders, people who are held accountable for helping others as leaders of government, literally um, acting as if her actions were totally correct, when in fact she was impeding law enforcement. She was avoiding being arrested, and she was shot as she attempted to harm another ICE agent. That's the only conclusion I can come up with. And when I think of all these abnormal things that are going on like that, like I said at the beginning, the Supreme Court, that abnormal situation, and that the this situation in Minnesota, the millions and billions of dollars being stolen from daycare centers. I think about all these things, and then we see people in the streets protesting this, protesting law enforcement. Who does that? Now, when I grew up in the 60s, we did protest, and I was involved in protests. Yes, we were protesting for such, I think, worthy causes as civil rights, discrimination, personal freedoms, and Vietnam. Issues that we believe we were on the right side of the coin. The people that were doing the law enforcement most of the time allowed us to do these protests, whether it was in the Chicago Convention of 1968 or wherever it was. We were allowed to protest within boundaries. We didn't go out, even in those crazy days in the 60s. We didn't go out and literally grab on to a law enforcement's vehicle and try to be drugged by it. Not a chance. But we had our signs, we had our places to demonstrate, we shouted out our displeasure, and we were supporting the right issues, the real issues, not criminals, not stupid issues like what sex you are. It was issues that mattered: discrimination, civil rights, Vietnam. I want everyone to just think for a moment, how can we do this better? How can we help people come together? How can we end this absurd, abnormal behavior, which is, I don't know. I hear this Trump syndrome. Well, Trump is going to come and go, and there'll be other people that'll be president, etc. We have to figure out how people can get along. And that is the point of this program. How do we get along? There's really only one answer, and that's our Lord Jesus Christ. And that answer involves loving one another, even when you don't agree with one another's opinion, and caring for people, caring for them, helping them up, helping them make right decisions, caring for them, understanding where they're coming from, their frustration, their disappointment. We have to be able to care, to listen. And the last and probably the most important thing to do after love is, how do we service these people? How do we help these people? You know, I won't go into a couple of riots that I was in the presence of. They turned out to be riots. They were supposed to be peaceful demonstrations. But you know what calmed them down? believe it or not, was just a person handing out coffee and saying, Jesus loves you. I can remember that in the streets of Chicago in 1968 during the Democratic Convention. I can remember that. Just walking down the street with coffee in little cups and handing them out to people. And all of a sudden, people were listening and they were pausing for a drink and they weren't angering and throwing things and spitting at one another. Instead, they took a pause and they were actually showing compassion for one another, handing coffee to the policeman, handing coffee to the protester, smiling, offering cheers, handing out pencils. Salvation Army was doing that. You know, Christians, a lot, all of you, whether you go to a church or not, but if you have in your heart Jesus Christ, and you know what I'm talking about, when you see disharmony, step in there, offer a word of love and understanding. And if you've got the money, grab a cup of coffee or a Coke or something and share it. Break bread. Show you care. Serve one another. And maybe the stupidity of these abnormal behaviors will begin to end. And we'll have again a great country that loves one another. I appreciate your time in listening to this program. And I hope you thought just a moment about how you can have an impact on people who are doing abnormal things. Have a great day. This has been An Ordinary Man, and I appreciate your time. And I'm Jim Whining. God bless.